Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Ronna, and welcome to the start of a new season. My guest tonight, we'll get right to it, is Doug Lary. And Doug lives in Willimantic, and he is running to be a Registrar of Voters in Wyndham. Wyndham is a lot different from New London in terms of how its registrars of voters are organized. But we'll talk about voting in general and also about Doug's candidacy. So welcome, Doug.
Thank you.
I guess the first obvious question is, why are you running to be a Registrar of Voters?
Well, I'm a data geek, and I was helping a friend with her campaign 5 years ago, and I found out that the data for voters in my town was less than high quality. And an amazing number of the postcards and literature we tried to send out to mailing addresses came back. And so as it turns out, I got started by a lot of wasted postage.
Oh, hey, as good as any.
Good a reason as any. But
because that wasted postage had a message.
Well, indeed. From that, I was able to learn, well, these addresses are not good. I wonder which ones are. And then I learned gradually how to find good addresses, how to identify dead voters, how to identify dormant voters. And gradually, I've worked more and more with the registrar's office to do that sort of work.
So after that campaign, you've been involved quite a bit in voting in your hometown.
Well,
can you talk a little bit about the different ways you've been involved?
Well, indeed. I used to work for the Fortune 500, IBM, Hartford, and had no time in my life other than work. And then I became semi-retired about 2007, 2010, and gradually had more time to devote to civics. And so I've been an ethics commissioner. I've just recently finished 2 years on charter revision, ran for Board of Ed, and now Registrar of Voters.
So in terms of, you've been working in the registrar's office for quite a while, and one of the things you've been working on is the bad addresses, right?
Indeed. When I first started working with them, we had 13,500 registered voters. We now have 10,000.
Okay.
1/4 of the people are no longer listed as registered voters. And in a college community, this is fairly frequent. Mansfield, where UConn has it,
London is kind of similar.
I would imagine you would have similar issues. And the worry there is that as soon as you know there are thousands of addresses and people that won't vote, the potential for fraud is high. Doesn't mean anyone's going to, but the potential's high. If you can be fairly certain these people will not vote, then those people might mysteriously vote someday.
Could be. They can be listed active for quite a while.
Oh, indeed they can. It takes a lot to become an inactive voter. And so I've worked with the registrars on how we can work a good canvas so that we aren't removing people who do exist, but we are removing people who have left for other states.
Now, one of the other ways, you were recently certified as a moderator. What do moderators do? Moderators
run the elections. In a given building or site, the moderator's in charge. The registrars may help set up the event town-wide, but there could be as many as 20 sites in a big city, and somebody's got to run those sites. Certified Connecticut moderators do that work, and I'm one of them. I can work in any town as a moderator for an election or referendum.
Now, is becoming a moderator at all dependent on what your party affiliation is?
Well, often, because the registrars must recommend you, and the town must pay for you to go to class. And therefore, it is often very party-oriented. And I'll give the Democratic registrar in my town a lot of credit. When she saw she didn't have enough moderators willing to work all the sites, not just the favorite site, she got myself involved, and the mayor's lady, Anita, who is an independent. I'm a Green. I thought that was very impressive that she would go outside her own party to seek additional moderators, and it's been good for the community.
Well, you're touching on something that, we have in every town a Republican and a Democratic registrar of voters. Now, you're running to be a Green registrar.
Mm-hmm.
in a way. I think you're really running to be the registrar for everyone who's not a Democrat or a Republican.
If I could, I would run without a party at all, even though I am a Green. The largest group of voters is unaffiliated. And it's sad that the two-party system has excluded them from direct representation in the most critical moment of our democracy, when we vote.
So now, I think.
But remember, it's the two big parties making the rules, so big surprise that they've created a system.
And actually, I think it's gotten worse, not better, over the last few years.
For decades, we've had a growing number of unaffiliated voters. It's now more than there are Democrats and more than there are Republicans. We have unaffiliated voters throughout Connecticut, above 40%.
Well, I have just a couple of slides here of some of your campaign slogans, which might give people an idea of, okay, 46% of us aren't a Democrat or Republican.
Right. In my community, 44% are unaffiliated and about 2% are in the minor parties, spread out across all the many minor parties.
And I'm suspecting that New London is probably similar, and I think Connecticut statewide has probably 40 to 42% unaffiliated
That is
voters.
correct. As a statewide average, that's the case. There was a dip in the 70s where it went down into the mid-30s, and it has come roaring back up into the 40s, much like it was during the I Like Ike seasons back in the 50s. It's amazing, but people think unaffiliated voters are new. Hearing from them is going to be news.
Well, yeah, and it's really hard to get your voice heard as an unaffiliated candidate or voter.
Yeah, the system's basically set up to hear from the loudest party.
Well, let's see. So we have that one, and now also, you said registrar for all of us.
Well, of course. There are already registrars and deputies for the two largest parties in every town. There have to be, whether they're on a ballot, not on a ballot, whether they run or not, whether they die, they're going to be one.
And but they are members of their own respective
Right, they
large
serve
parties.
all the voters. But there's always the tension that they're there to keep an eye on each other to some extent.
Right. I'm sure that's
Even
the
in
idea.
communities like Hartford that are overwhelmingly Democratic, still you have another party keeping an eye on the system.
Which is a good thing.
Well, it is. As much as I get worried that the unaffiliated people aren't well represented and the minor parties have no voice at all to speak of, it wouldn't be any better if it was just a single party.
No, that would be
No.
really scary.
That would be Russia.
Yeah.
You know, they go to elections too. You know, choose this one.
And this is something I think that merits some explaining.
Well, indeed. The hardest part of my campaign is the Democratic registrar is popular in my town. And why shouldn't she be? Large number of people are Democrats. She's a nice lady. She's done the job for 10 years. Nonetheless, she can't lose. State law is that the top two vote getters are going to be seated. But if the top two parties are not in the top two, they are seated anyway.
Right, so the Republicans and Democrats are guaranteed registrars in every town in Connecticut.
So should we come up with the Plaid Party, and the Plaid Party is really popular in the decades ahead, still there will be these other two parties so long as statewide they are the two largest. Even if your community has gone Plaid or Green, nonetheless, your town will have two registrars from those two major parties statewide. So if the eastern half of the state should go Plaid first, nonetheless, there will still be representation from those two large parties.
Okay, so you're running to be a third registrar.
Correct. I de-emphasize my party. It's not because I don't like the Greens or that I'm not green. It's that the unaffiliated voters aren't green, the Democrats aren't green, the Republicans aren't green. There are 40 Greens in town. That's not my voter base. My voter base is people who respect my work.
And so, and if you, let's be realistic, you're not going to get more votes than the Democrat.
No,
in
not
Wyndham.
at all. Not a chance.
But Wyndham, like New London,
Mm-hmm.
it has a very big preponderance of Democratic voters.
I imagine it's similar, probably
It's
40-12, something like that.
Probably something like that, 12 to 15% are Republicans,
Yep.
perhaps.
And that's what we have. We have 42 and 12.
And then the other 42 are like unaffiliated. Or
Right, yeah,
other
and then the
everyone
largest group
else.
is unaffiliated, right.
So, but now, if you can get more votes than the Republican,
Then I'll be
Then what
seated,
happens?
and so will the Republican. So this isn't a race against the Republican, it's to join the office. I already work with them fairly often at budget referendums and, well, any election where I'm not a candidate. But I'm seeking to join that office. I'm not replacing somebody that's in there.
so as you go door to door or work, go to where the crowds are and talk to people, how hard is it for them to grasp the idea of 3 registrars?
They don't have a whole lot of trouble grasping the concept of 3 registrars. Many of them don't know there's more than one because they've voted for theirs all their life. If they're a Democrat, they voted for
Right.
the Democrat, and so on. They just never noticed that the other one that's on the ballot serves also. And so, they're aware of their registrar, and everything else is unknown. And so a 3rd registrar doesn't surprise them so much as that I need to come in second and they can't lose. That sort of math is much more bewildering. And I have lots of people who believe they understand, and then we'll go turn around and try to tell it to the next person and get it completely wrong. So it's simplest to think, I just need votes and the others can't lose.
Right. And if you get enough votes.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of percentage do you feel as though you would need to?
Well, if I get 34%, mathematically, I'm automatically in
That's
second
true.
place. So I'm aiming for 34%. However, realistically, last time I ran, I got 11.5% of the votes cast for registrar. The Republican got 18.8%, and the Democrat continued to get over 60%. I did, however, beat nobody, because
Yes.
the voters, about 10% of them, voted for nobody.
No.
So I beat nobody. And I was
So
glad I did.
actually,
It would
if you
have been
could get all the-
embarrassing to lose to nobody.
But if you could get the nobodies to vote for you,
If those 10% showed up, or if the unaffiliated realized that, gee, their friend Bunny won't lose, or their friend Nancy won't lose, then that would be sufficient. Realistically, the Republican had about 19%, I had about 12. If I get 17%, and at least a few of them are from people who understand that now, that may go well.
Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about minor parties. You're going to be on 2 ballot lines because not only are you a Green, but there is a local party in Wyndham called the Bottom Line.
Oh, indeed. In fact, it's somewhat there because a Green ran for first select person in 2005 and did fairly well, came in second. Pretty good second. In 2007, a group of petitioning candidates, seeing that, hey, third parties can do stuff, got out there and did a big petitioning drive and called themselves collectively the Bottom Line, because that's where petitioners live. And that went very well, and our Green got elected as part of that Bottom Line slate. And since then, there's been a Green in that party one way or another since then. I am involved with them, but in my town of Wyndham, from 2007 onward, the chief elected officer has not been from the 2 major parties. We had a Green, we've had Bottom Line, the mayor is from the Bottom Line, and he's been re-elected on the Bottom Line. So in my town, you can be a third party or no party person and be well received.
And really, New Londoners can relate to that. 10 years ago, we had a local party, One New London, which turned out not to have the longevity that Bottom Line has enjoyed for the last decade, but got 2 people elected to council in one session.
Oh, yeah.
Then they sort
Bottom
of
Line has
imploded.
Board of
and-
Ed, Board of Finance, Town Council, the mayor. It's impressive collection. 7 out of 8 of their candidates won last fall.
Now, there's a slide here, and I know no one is going to be able to read it, but one of the slides you said that I rejiggered a little.
Oh, yes, I see.
These are all the parties, designations that people can
Isn't
have
it
in
a
this
blast to
state.
read this list? This is amazing. But there are parties like the Bottom Line that in their area do very well. In Willington, the Sentinel Party is doing quite well. And there are other communities where a serious third party for that locality exists. And then there are slightly amusing parties that one can find there. There's a Whig party and a Whig without an H party. And then there's the Guilty Party,
Yes.
which I think was probably the most amusing.
Yes, I think it was a Green who ran as a guilty party candidate
Well, bravo.
in New Haven many years ago.
An honest
I'm not
politician,
sure
huh?
they've continued in that,
Well, last I looked,
reactive.
there was one member of the Guilty Party. So it's pretty clear who the Guilty Party is.
That is funny.
Oh, indeed.
So really, there are, so when people register to vote, it really isn't
It
about
is
just
embarrassing.
Democrats
Our
and
form has
Republicans.
Democrat, Republican, depending on who's the governor, it switches positions sometimes. And then it has other. And it's not like there's a nice list on the back. Or they make you guess what the two major parties are. You know,
Right.
if you're an other, you have to know how to spell it. And there do seem to be variations.
And I think there's a lot of confusion too, because people who choose not to be in a party in Connecticut are called unaffiliated voters.
Mm-hmm.
In many states, they're called independent voters, but we have an
And we have the
independent.
independent
We
party
have
here
lots
in
of
town.
different
And-
independent
Yeah,
parties.
in my town, there are 80 members of the Independent Party, and they nearly all believe that they are unaffiliated. And they say, I registered independent. And it's like, yes, you art professor from the university. You are in one of the most conservative parties there is.
Right.
Would you like a registration form to adjust that? You know? But that's the kind of thing a registrar can do, help you find the paperwork that gets you in the party you want to be in.
And that's something that perhaps a third registrar might be more motivated to do than a major party one. Not necessarily.
Well, the ones
but-
I work with in Wyndham are quite good about you being whatever party you want to be. However, all the regalia around them is red or blue. In my case, I
Yeah.
dress casual when it comes to parties.
Now, one thing we wanted to talk about a little bit is voting by age, because I was trying to think of the different things you've discovered as you've been working with voting.
I have discovered things because I love data, and when I collect data from the town and say, oh, what am I going to do with this, and what am I going to find out, you discover things. And early on, I discovered that all the postcards we were sending to renters of young ages that we thought would be open to a third-party message have bad addresses. And that's rather universal in other towns when I've worked with other candidates. Up at Yukon, when Ortiz ran an independent campaign, I helped him. Same problem. Student voters have bad addresses, they move often.
And sometimes the dorm buildings have their postal addresses aren't what their campus addresses are.
Yes, and many registrars aren't fond of typing very long, complicated, hard-to-sort campus addresses that aren't streets. They're very street-oriented in the residence. Where do you live? These are common problems for renters and students in particular. But in terms of voting, particularly for referendums where there's very low turnout, the very low turnout is taxpayers, and taxpayers tend to be older, and they tend to know the issues better because it's the same issue it was 30 years ago. Mansfield is still talking about Four Corners. And so it hasn't changed since I lived there. But it will be older voters who show up in the budget referendums. In the state year, it will be a few more younger voters. And then in the presidential year, golly, everyone watches TV
and so the younger
$80 billion
voters
of ads. The younger voters will show up for that because they can't avoid knowing about it.
So we have a graph here of turnout by age.
Yeah.
in the Wyndham budget, Board of Ed budget referenda.
Isn't that amazing? There's a peak there just a bit above our ages where people really show up. They've lost their income, they're now retired, they're living on fixed bucks, and they have the time to go to a budget referendum. So big surprise, they go.
And so even though you might get younger voters coming out for things like the presidential elections, I would
Municipal
imagine-
elections and referendums tend to be like that. Very high in the just recently retired age bracket.
Well, I'm in that age bracket.
Yes, yeah.
And I
Likewise.
vote.
We vote.
But what can we do about that? Voting is
Oh,
important.
it's
do we
very
get-
important. When I work with young voters, like at street fests or fairs, or today at the soup kitchen, I was telling a guy, remember, I don't ever know how you voted. You can fill in just one little bubble. Mine would be fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would do well. But you don't have to fill in the whole ballot. You have to show up and get your name crossed off the list. It's important that your name get off the list because guys like me and the big parties in particular go and find out who votes. So they know your age, they know your sex, they know your neighborhood, they know your last name. They know whether
Yeah.
you have a suffix that suggests you're a senior. They know who votes. Big surprise if politicians pay attention to who votes and pay less attention to those who don't. So if you're running around saying, well, gee, I don't vote because what does it matter? Everybody who does vote is enjoying that because they get a bigger say than you do. If you don't vote, you get no say.
And I am sure that if you're registering a complaint, whether it's at the municipal level or the congressional level,
Mysteriously, I
They
get
know.
calls and emails saying, does so-and-so vote? Or who is so-and-so? And I happen to know as the guy who loves voting data. And so I get these requests for, should I be paying attention to this group? It's that simple. Politicians listen to voters. They don't know how you vote, but they know if you vote.
and if you vote, they
They
want
listen better.
your vote.
Yes. Well, they want your ear at least, or they want to hear you. Even if they're not convinced you will listen to them, they want to hear what you have to say if you're a known voter or from a known voting group. If your neighborhood votes, your church votes, you get listened to better.
Now, voting in Connecticut, other than some of the things you already
One of
mentioned.
the colonies.
Yeah. Well, what are the problems that you found?
Well, where we put the polling locations, that's clearly a problem sometimes. After all, if you have impoverished folks in a city and you put the polling site far from the transit, that will be a problem for those voters. Generally speaking, if the voters don't have cars, you can easily choose who votes.
Now, you did some work in Wyndham
Oh, indeed.
related to the polling stations, and we do have a map here. I don't know how.
Yes, there it is. Yes, our town used to have 5 polling sites, which was very expensive. And it wasn't necessarily good, but it did. And then it changed to having just 2. One was a small rural fire station with not enough space to turn a bus around in its parking lot. Just enough space for a fire truck to come out of the garage, but not enough to turn it around. And the other was a huge parking lot in the city portion where anything could happen. Well, in 2008, the state police let up a cry because nobody could get to the polling site because traffic was jammed at this little teeny fire department. So where the polling sites are matters during heavy turnout. We've introduced the blue area in the far west end of town that is very densely populated with walkers and provided a flat level terrain where they can walk to a polling site. In the green region in the middle, it's mostly drivers, some walkers, and in the red region, there are no walkers. You drive or you don't vote.
Well, yeah, it's interesting, and this is a subject that's been a big issue in New London. We had 7 districts
They cost
and
money.
6 polling spots until about 5 or 6 years ago. Then we shrank down to three districts, 3 polling places. And there are some neighborhoods that really feel disenfranchised.
Sure. Unless somebody organizes transportation for those neighborhoods, it may not seem like a long distance if you own a car or if you're young and healthy and love jogging over to vote. But some neighborhoods have more trouble voting than others. That's one of our challenges. Another is simply that renters have more difficult addresses. If you think about it, you live at 19. I
Right.
live at 183, but I don't live at B-2.
Right.
And the sort order of addresses gets very messy once you go beyond a street number. And college dormitories, horrible sort. So when you go to vote, if you're a renter, likely it's going to take longer to find you on the list, and your voting experience is going to be absolutely more likely to be unpleasant because you'll wait longer and the guy behind you will wait longer, and somehow he'll make it known that you're clogging up his day.
And it's possible you won't be found on the list.
Oh, it's beyond possible. It is likely. If you move every 9 months like a typical college student, you will have moved how many times since the last time you voted? Yeah, it's just astounding. Then we'll send you over to visit the assistant registrars, fill out some more paperwork, and a half hour later, you probably will get to vote. It kind of depends on the rules and when you last voted, and vote more often and keep your address up to date. It's now online, so renters can do this for themselves and should. It will greatly speed up their voting if they get their address kept up to date.
So the online registration is something that's
If you have a driver's license in Connecticut, you really should stop dealing with the paper and get online. It's that simple. I like explaining it to people and double checking with them, and the paper's comfortable. But then the registrars have to do all that data entry, and some of them need a little glasses.
Yeah.
And who knows your address better than you? Type
Right.
it in yourself, and it'll get right.
Makes sense. So what other problems have you encountered?
Ooh, well, in Connecticut, we fortunately have fairly reasonable voter ID requirements. The first time you vote, you need to have better ID. But thereafter, something that suggests you're still in the right city and still in the right district is what is cared about most.
So they ask for a driver's license, but if you have a utility bill or something that
Or
shows
often your auto registration will be sufficient because it's got your address. So any government document that's got address, signature, or photo, those help.
Well, I think maybe we should talk a little bit about this year's election and this year's ballot.
Okay.
And then afterwards, we'll do some different stuff. But
Oh, okay.
you have a sample ballot from Wyndham.
Yeah, it's not terribly different than other towns.
And except for the questions and the very local, let's see, can we put it up here?
Yeah, sure.
and-
Oh, that's doing
Is
pretty
there a
well.
way to, it's looking a little fuzzy, but maybe we can zoom in on part of it.
Okay.
The first
Well,
column,
first column, the governor. Most voters will get this because that's where all the advertising is going to be. So this is a fairly well understood column.
except the interesting thing is, for me, of course, that the two major party candidates are both listed twice.
Well, yes, we have the two major national parties, the Republican and Democratic Party, are listed at the top in the order they last got votes during the governor's race. But their sister parties, as we might call them,
Right.
With stronger and different points of view, will often cross-endorse candidates
Yeah.
from the major parties. So the Working Families Party, not universally, but commonly or frequently,
Right.
endorses a Democrat. And the Independent Party is acting, well, a bit less independent and is often choosing to cross-endorse a Republican.
Right. And this year, there's no Green running, there's no Libertarian
Not for
running for
governor.
that. There is one petitioning candidate.
Well, and bravo, he had to get 7,500 verified signatures to get on this ballot in this location, and that deserves some attention. That took organization. That's a great example of organizing talent.
Yeah.
Not
It's
a
not
small
a
feat.
trivial task. And it's-
Pelto tried it and did not succeed.
No, and I think in his case, maybe because he spent so many years
I
in the
think-
Democratic Party.
I think he thought it was
I
easier.
think he was very naive about it. I know he said he got about a 20 to 25% cushion. You need to get double.
Oh, no, gosh.
If you want to get 7,500
Well,
votes, you need to hand in 12
Your
to
petitions are being
15,000.
checked by the other
Right.
parties, by the registrars.
Right.
And if they can't read it clearly, they've got a short time frame to deal with this. So they might just move on and say, I didn't find
And
it.
they get swamped. The amount
it's
of
amazing.
paper that goes into it is just insane.
Yeah.
The
In a
trees
big city,
probably
they'll get
shudder.
hundreds of pages. It's amazing. Well, we also have representatives for Congress.
Right, and you and we are in the same congressional district.
Yeah, oh, indeed. Much of eastern Connecticut is in the 2nd Congressional District because we are large but not particularly heavily populated. You and I are in 2 of the larger towns. There's a Republican running, there's the very well-known Democrat, and then we have a Green Party member, Bill Clyde, who's been on the show a
He
couple
was on
weeks
the show a
ago.
couple weeks ago.
Dr. Clyde's a very bright man.
Very, yeah.
Dan Reel, I happen to know, the Libertarian, he's run before and does quite well in debates, particularly on college campuses.
I bet. And interestingly, he's done a lot of work with people who get caught in bad mortgages.
Oh, yes.
So it's a very, he's got his own point of view, and
This gives you quite a good range of
It
choice.
does.
You may
Lori
have
Hopkins
favorites.
Kavanaugh happens to be very well known in New London, probably not outside of New London. And yeah, probably maybe New London and Waterford, but not so much outside. But unfortunately, next week there will be congressional debates, and they'll be televised by CPTV, and only Lori Hopkins Kavanaugh and Joe Courtney have been invited to those particular
Yeah,
debates.
it's amazing. You can do all this work to get on a ballot and be ignored by the media. It's sad.
And even for this kind of office, ballot access is not trivial. You need about 2,500 to 3,000 validated signatures. So you need to get at least 5,000 people
It's
to
considerable
sign.
work. Bill Clyde has been working quite hard at this.
Yes, and we have had the ballot line since 2008 when Scott Deschapie ran, and he started in January, and he had a goal. He did it as a grassroots effort, which is
Pelto started too
very
late this year.
difficult. If you start in January and you go out every day and say, I'm not going to go home until I have 40 signatures, and you do that for 6 months, you can do it.
That's about what it takes.
But it is about what it takes.
Indeed.
So, but there are going to be some other debates in, I think the 20th perhaps. There's the Norwich Bulletin is running a debate, and there's going to be one at ECSU where all 4 candidates
I like
will
to
be
hear more
invited.
voices. When I heard Dan in debate, I voted for him that year. He was very good in the debate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He-
and a good set of positions to have represented. Doesn't mean I'd always vote for those, but this year I'll likely be voting for a Green.
Yeah, well, in 2 weeks, we are actually hoping to have Bill Clyde come back with Dan Reel.
Oh, wonderful.
And have the alternative voices for representative in
Well,
Congress
they're
heard.
both quite smart, so that should be quite
It
a
should be
good
really
discussion.
For the presidential debates 2 years ago, the Free and Equal nonprofit ran presidential debates with the 4 candidates that weren't on the ballot. Were not invited to the debates, but were on the ballot in many states. Jill Stein, Gary Johnson, Rocky Anderson, and I forget the other Constitution Party guy. And they were both more informative and more entertaining than the official debate. So I'm hoping that having Bill and Dan here will also be
That
both
should be good
more
viewing.
informative and more entertaining than the official debates.
Let's hope Joe's watching.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Hey, we'll put it on YouTube.
There you go. Okay.
Okay.
Well, in all over Connecticut, there are state Senate seats up. And in my area, the 20-year incumbent chose not to run. A protege is running from his party. And local businessman John French is running from my neighborhood in Wyndham. It will basically be Mansfield and Wyndham's college populations are quite different than the small rural towns that make up the rest of the district. It should be interesting.
It should be interesting. In New London, for people who are watching locally, it's a similar situation that, well, for state senate, because Andrea Stillman retired, Betsy Ritter, who was a state rep, is running, and Paul Formica is running. He's an East Lyme businessman, so they have quite divergent views. They're both fairly well known in the community, but there is not an incumbent.
Yep.
And as there's also not going to be an incumbent in our New London state rep race. Well, no, in the Waterford state rep race in New London.
In our state rep race, we're having quite an interesting contest. Susan Johnson's the incumbent.
There's no
does quite
Republican
well.
candidate?
No Republican candidate. Remember, I'm from a third-party oriented town. The mayor, elected from the bottom line, is running
Only on the bottom line?
only on the bottom line. He's a Republican for national issues, for local issues.
Yeah.
He's a local guy.
Yeah.
So, if it was called the Wyndham Party, he'd be in it. But he wants to represent the town at the state legislature. So he's running for state rep against the incumbent. It should be a very interesting contest, but it certainly provides choice.
It does. And you mentioned before that Susan Johnson will actually appear twice on the ballot.
Oh,
She
yes,
was
yes.
endorsed
There's a
by
flaw on this
working
sample ballot.
families.
It's being corrected as we speak. But Susan is cross-endorsed by the Working Families Party and will show up here. And when you vote for such a candidate, the candidate will get your vote regardless of which line you choose. But
Right.
the parties care
Right.
considerably which of the two lines you choose to vote for someone on. For instance, our Green Party might prefer that you vote for me on the Green Party line.
Right.
Of course, back home in Wyndham, the bottom line has been successfully running
Right.
candidates for years, and they also like the idea of having their line well represented.
And, to that point, if you look at our ballots, the Republican line is on top, even though we have a Democratic mayor, because Dan Malloy received fewer votes on the Democratic Party line than Foley did last
So
year
the Working
on
Families
the
Party,
Republican
small as they may
line.
be, provided a lot of the boost for Malloy to win over the Republican,
Right.
who got more votes on the Republican line. So the make-up and go past votes came from the Working Family line, perhaps as a protest for, I'm willing to vote for Malloy, but not necessarily for his party. And
Yeah.
that's available when you see these cross endorsements. You could vote for me and not for my party by choosing the other line, or, either way.
Okay, and of course, we're voting for Secretary of State.
Well, yes, the statewide offices will be the same across the state.
Denise Merrill is running again.
Secretary of State, yep.
I don't know
Our Green Party has a candidate, Mike
Mike
DeRosa,
DeRosa,
our
who-
party chair.
who has been very involved in voting issues.
He cares a lot about those issues. Yeah.
He does. We also have a Green Party candidate running for Comptroller, Ralph Maurer, and for Attorney General, Steve Fournier. And Doug Lary is on the Wyndham ballot for Registrar of Voters. Now, I wanted you to talk a little bit about this question
Over on the
because
right.
this is going to be on all the ballots statewide.
It won't necessarily be in the same position on every ballot in every
Now,
town.
I think in New London, all the questions will be on the reverse side.
Yeah, could be. But every town will have this question. It's a statewide question for a constitutional change. Our state constitution actually controls that we must show up in person on Tuesday and only Tuesday to vote. And if we can't show up, we must sign that we can't show up and swear to, and that's called
Yeah.
absentee voting.
And give a reason, like
No.
you're sick or disabled.
On the
or-
national news, you'll often hear that Ohio's voting 3 weeks early and Florida's been voting for weeks and so on, or no excuse absentee. Some states mail the ballot to everyone. In our state, that's not the case. And if we want to have any change at all, even to discuss it, we need to have a constitutional change, hence the ballot question. I would recommend, yes, there's no specific policy being requested here, just a change from we only vote on one day. That's more expensive.
And we
Because we have
don't,
to get ready
Yeah.
for this peak moment. And it also rules out a lot of very good voting locations because they can't handle the volume of everybody shows up for the Obama year or some
Right.
big turnout year.
so look for that question. I know in New
Oh, yeah.
London, there will be local questions as well.
And in Wyndham, we do
hopefully,
too.
we'll talk about them at a future show. I wanted to talk to you more about the audit that Connecticut Voters Counts does, because you said that's partly how you got interested in voting. And although Luther Weeks does appear on the show regularly, I wanted you to talk a little bit about it. And I do have a couple of the graphics so people can see some things.
Great. Well, Luther Weeks is in charge of Connecticut election audit. We're a citizen group. We're not official. We basically provide observers to the state-required audits after each election. 10% of the districts are randomly selected. We then go watch the registrars and their poll workers manually count the ballots to see if they get the same results as the machines. The idea was originally that we should know the machines are working, that it's human verifiable, and that there's no hanky-panky going on. It's also good for training people in case there ever is a need for a recount, because people will see the ballots a little teeny bit differently than a machine. A machine can tell if you got your mark in the bubble, but it will never be able to tell that you made a very good circle around the bubble and a big arrow and said, "He's my man."
Okay,
And
so
so
we do
voters'
have
intent-
a picture here that
Oh, yeah.
something that a machine will not pick up,
Well, no, a machine will.
or if it's not in the bubble,
well,
they
look-
might not.
Look how hard that is.
Yeah.
The bubble isn't filled in, but is anybody wondering how this voter felt? It's amazing. I mean, the machines are sensitive, they're pretty good, but it's hard to tell how the machine should have handled that. That
Yeah.
came from an audit I went to recently, and
I
It-
even really am not sure what intent is. Were they trying, did they hate the ones that they didn't vote for so much that they didn't even, that they wanted to totally obscure them?
it's
did
amazing.
it-
But it was an interesting ballot, and so I,
Yeah. At least you could probably tell that the machine would not have picked it up.
as it turns
because
out, the bubbles had very little ink in them.
the bubbles had, yeah.
So-
But sometimes you do see these and there's an X in the bubble or
Sure.
a check mark. And I think the machines actually do,
They pick up anything
Hey,
above
good.
about a sixth of a bubble. And so stray marks, like dropping the pen, can cause a ballot to be rejected. If the machine spits your ballot back out in November and you look at it and say, "How come?" It could be as simple as you dropped the pen, it made a single dot in the middle of an oval, and then you went off and voted for whoever you wanted, but it thinks it's an overcast vote.
now, if you vote and there's an overcast vote,
Yeah,
will you get it,
overvote.
overvote? Will
Yep.
you
It should spit it right back out.
spit it out, or
Yep.
will it just invalidate it later?
It will spit it out. The tabulator clerk then can ask you, well, would you like to go get another ballot? And they'll give you a privacy folder and off you go and get another ballot from the ballot clerk. Or alternately, he can push some magic buttons and it will accept your ballot for all the other races, but not for the overvoted race. This year, for instance, in my community, every column gets only one candidate's vote.
Right, but in some elections, certainly in
municipal elections, vote for 4 out of 7. Yeah, it gets
Yeah, and then
wild.
if you have people who are in more than one column, my experience in New London has been if there are 2 candidates, things work out pretty well. When you were on 3 lines, you weren't sure that things were being tallied correctly.
Well, very few candidates have ever been on 3 lines at once. In 2012, I was on 3 lines, green, bottom line, and I petitioned as well. if you're a minor party candidate, you can't be all that confident that the parties will fill out the paperwork right, or meet in August, or get your name on the ballot. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's surprisingly difficult. I was endorsed by the Green Party more than once this year.
Yes, I think 3 times.
Three
and
times,
it finally
and
stuck.
I am on the ballot. And so, bravo. But there's a lot that can go wrong. And if you're a big, organized national party, you've got people for this. If you're ordinary citizens making up a small party in a small town, there's a lot you could possibly not do quite perfectly right. And it's more difficult to get on the ballot than people imagine. So anybody who's on, I'm impressed that they went to the effort.
Yeah, especially if they're not
To provide choice,
Republicans or
often
Democrats.
at largely their own expense. It's good civic work.
So, now when, so maybe talk just a little bit about how you get involved in the audit, even though Luther will go into more detail, but how that experience was.
Well, it's basically a volunteer effort. We look for people who are willing to watch other people count. This will either thrill you, watching people embarrassing themselves trying to count, or watching how well a town does. I went to a town recently where it's done so well, it was like, I took notes, share this technique. But most towns, it's overconfidence until 2 p.m., followed by panic from about 2 p.m. onward as they realize, we're having trouble counting the ballots the same way. Regardless of what the machine says, we can't agree on the number of ballots or votes twice in a row.
My experience has been that the first time a town does this, they totally underestimate the
it takes a
time
lot
that
of
it will
effort.
take, especially you have to start out right.
Yeah,
And
you have to be organized. The most important thing is having a good form to write down the work in progress results. If you're going to be counting ballots, where are you going to put the results in between? Are you going to count to 8,000 in your head? No, you're going to have hash marks, you're going to have columns, you're going to have names. Are they clear? Are they well read, or did you scribble them with a crayon this morning? Very different results based on very different planning. And it's a very good exercise in if your town ever needed to hand count the votes in a tight race. Some of these people are better at this than others.
No,
You want your town to be good at this because it's important.
Right, and New London has had some recanvassing, but they don't let observers observe in their own town, so I've never watched it in that particular way. I wanted to talk to you we have only about 5 minutes left, just so you know. I have a couple slides here about some of your Green Party activities.
Oh, indeed. So here, for instance, Willimantic's famous boombox parade. We have no bands, but we have radios, and we have noise, and we have people. This year it was raining, and it was nice and cool. July 4th is normally oven on this road. So I marched in between the Green Party ahead of me here and the Republicans just behind me. Basically, we had politics in the rain in Willimantic. It's a large event, several thousand people go, and most of the big statewide politicians show up at this parade.
Yeah, but it was really wet this
It
year.
was wet, and we were doing the Pelto petitions together in the rain.
Yeah, that was a disastrous petitioning day, I've got to say.
Tough day to do petitions.
Yeah, terrible. Not a bad day to walk around in.
Oh no, temperature was good, but yeah, paper. So New York City here, September 21st, we had 310,000 people show up in New York City from across the nation, across the world, to march on classic green issues of the environment, climate change concerns. We had vegans saying that cows contribute, and the agriculture that supports cows in particular. We had the fission folks saying fission's cleaner than fusion, or vice versa. And we had oil companies suggesting that gas was better than that messy stuff. We had everybody, all different kinds of opinions, but it was a great day to walk with 300,000 other people who had an opinion. Fascinating.
And a lot of attention on.
Oh my, yeah. Just lining up for the parade took 16 blocks, elbow to elbow, 16 blocks of people lined up. And then it was like an hour before you got to start walking. it was quite an amazing turnout. Well organized, to give New York some credit. Well organized.
Good to know. And, well, I think we have to give up the computer because we're going to have it go out with the community calendar.
Oh, okay.
But I wanted to talk to you about how people can get involved, whether they want to learn more about your campaign or whether they want to get involved.
Well, the
in
moniker
election
is
in
Lary 3rd Registrar, 3RD, Lary 3rd Registrar. So I have a Facebook site, a website. Any good Google search engine or Bing will find me. After all, Lary is not a common name. Doug, Lary. Boom. You'll find me. But certainly enjoy people communicating by social media, on the website. Always need places for road signs. Always need people to help hand out flyers. And on the polling day, it's really helpful to have people at multiple polling sites showing off, hey, here's a ballot. We have 7 questions on our ballot in Wyndham this year, and people are going to have questions.
And we're going to have 5 questions, I think, on the New London one, most of them related to the budget.
And people who are showing up who don't know that are coming out to vote, like having a few moments in front of a large ballot. So I need people to stand with me for 14 hours and help the voters know what they're voting for.
And not to mention, being a Green, usually our names are just in some obscure corner of the ballot.
Lower right.
That if they're not specifically looking for us,
yeah.
they very frequently will not
If you're looking for
find us.
alternative candidates, start at the bottom and work up. The big guys are there. You will find a candidate before you get to the top, because all of them are there between the bottom and the top.
So, do you have any?
2 minutes.
Oh, we do have 2 minutes.
Well, I want to
Okay.
remind voters in my area that if you
Okay.
vote for Lary, everybody wins.
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't win unless people vote for me. The other 2 will win no matter
There.
what. They are
So
guaranteed.
for the Wyndham people, really,
It's a question of, do you want an additional voice in that office? I bring computer skills. I'm not with the 2 major parties. If you aren't with the 2 major parties, or if you're with either one of them and you'd like a little more not with them, I'm
Right.
more not with them.
Yeah, thank the folks.
Right. Well,
Sorry.
thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you, Doug. Next week, Bill Collins, who is running to be a state rep in Waterford,
Wonderful.
will be on our show. And we'll
thanks
see
for
you
having
on Election Day.
Indeed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, my darling, my sweet honeybee, won't you meet me by the old sycamore tree? I'll be waiting round till you come along. Oh, baby, please don't make me wait long. I walked that stone wall while you held my hand. We were all each other had back then. And every morning when I wake up, I thank God for you. 'Cause you are the one who got me through. Oh, my darling, my best friend, won't you meet me where the river bends? I'll be pacing, waiting, wishing for you. Oh, baby, love me, please love me, do. I walked that stone wall while you held